I could tell by the way Harold Brennan's hands shook as he held that thick envelope that something was very, very wrong. In 37 years of practicing estate law, I'd never seen him look quite so unsettled during a will reading. "Are you certain about the contents?" I heard him ask my grandmother during what turned out to be their final meeting 3 weeks before her death. I wasn't supposed to know about that conversation. Patricia told me about it later, after she'd overheard our parents discussing it in hushed, worried tones. My grandmother had smiled that knowing smile that had both charmed and terrified 3 generations of Whitmore children. "Absolutely certain, Harold. They need to learn what I've always known." Now I sat slouched in my chair at the far end of the polished mahogany table in the conference room of Brennan, Walsh and Associates, trying to look anywhere but at my 3 siblings. The tension in the room was so thick I could practically taste it, metallic and bitter, like the fear that had been sitting in my stomach since I'd gotten the call to attend this meeting. I didn't belong here, and we all knew it. Victoria sat ramrod straight beside me, her designer suit immaculate despite the sweltering July heat outside. At 34, she was the eldest and had always carried herself like she was already wearing the crown of family matriarch. Her Harvard law degree, her partnership at Morrison and Associates, her picture-perfect marriage to Dr. James Chun, her 2 honor-roll children, everything about her screamed, obvious heir apparent. Of course, she was of sound mind, Victoria said crisply when Harold mentioned grandmother's mental state. Grandmother was sharp as a tack until the very end. "Now, shall we proceed? I have a client meeting at 4. Marcus shifted uncomfortably next to her, and I recognized the look on his face, the same expression he'd worn during family dinners when the conversation turned to my life choices. At 32, he'd followed the family script perfectly, became a cardiac surgeon at Boston General, married Sarah, who was already calculating their potential inheritance in her head, I could tell, bought a house in the suburbs. Everything exactly as planned. Patricia clutched her husband David's hand so tightly her knuckles had gone white. She'd always been the peacemaker, the one who tried to smooth over the awkward moments when I showed up to family gatherings looking like I'd wandered in from a different century. She taught elementary school in a district where half her students qualified for free lunch, a choice that earned polite approval but never quite the same pride our grandmother lavished on Victoria and Marcus. And then there was me, 26 years old, black hair tied back in what my mother called that ridiculous man bun, wearing faded jeans and a vintage Ramones t-shirt to what was arguably the most important family meeting of our lives. I'd been the source of family embarrassment for years, the grandson who dropped out of Yale halfway through junior year to find himself, much to everyone's horror. "I still can't believe Oliver bothered to show up," Victoria whispered to Marcus, though loud enough for me to hear. Grandmother probably left him a token amount just to be fair. My jaw tightened, but I said nothing. What was the point? I'd grown accustomed to being the family disappointment, the cautionary tale they told about the importance of following through on commitments. The black sheep who couldn't hold a job for more than 6 months, who lived in a converted warehouse in Brooklyn, who created what I called mixed media installations that none of them understood or cared to understand. Harold cleared his throat and opened the envelope. The rustling of papers seemed unnaturally loud in the silence. "The estate is considerable," he began, and I half-listened as he rattled off numbers that might as well have been spoken in a foreign language. The Beacon Hill Mansion, the Martha's Vineyard House, investment portfolios, art collections, nearly $24 million total. I did the math quickly in my head. Split 4 ways, even after taxes, we were each looking at millions. Enough for me to finally stop worrying about rent, maybe get health insurance, possibly even rent a proper studio space instead of working in the corner of my warehouse. However, Harold said, and that single word changed everything. "The distribution is not what you might expect." He pulled out his reading glasses, and I felt my stomach drop into my shoes. "I, Margaret Eleanor Whitmore, being of sound mind and body, do hereby distribute my worldly possessions as follows. To my beloved granddaughter Victoria Whitmore Chin, I leave my collection of law books and legal documents." Law books. I saw Victoria's composed facade crack, just slightly. "To my dear grandson Marcus Whitmore, I leave my medical texts and the antique surgical instruments that belonged to your great-great-grandfather." medical books, and old surgical tools? Marcus had gone pale. To my sweet granddaughter Patricia Morrison, I leave my china collection and all the family photographs. China and photographs. Patricia was crying now, and not from gratitude. Harold paused and looked directly at me. I straightened in my chair, every nerve in my body suddenly alert. And to my grandson Oliver Whitmore, who has had the courage to follow his own path despite considerable family pressure, I leave the remainder of my estate in its entirety. This includes the Beacon Hill Mansion, the Martha's Vineyard property, all investment accounts, liquid assets, and any remaining personal property not specifically mentioned above. The world stopped. I stared at Harold as if he'd just announced that gravity had been repealed. I'm sorry, could you repeat that? You've inherited approximately $23 million, Mr. Whitmore, Harold said gently. $23 million. Me. The family fuck-up had just inherited $23 million. This is impossible, Victoria said, her voice sharp and cold. There has to be a mistake. Grandmother would never. She stopped herself, but I knew what she was going to say. Grandmother would never leave her fortune to someone like me. I assure you, there is no mistake, Harold said. He pulled out a sealed letter. Your grandmother also left this letter to be read aloud to all of you. I felt like I was having an out-of-body experience as Harold began to read my grandmother's final words. Her voice seemed to echo in the room as he spoke. My dear Victoria, Marcus, Patricia, and Oliver, if you are hearing this letter, then I am gone, and Harold has just delivered what I imagine was quite shocking news. I can picture your faces now. Victoria, you're probably already calculating your legal options. Marcus, you're wondering how you'll explain this to Sarah. Patricia, you're crying, though I hope by the end of this letter there'll be tears of understanding rather than disappointment. And Oliver, my dear boy, you probably look like you've been struck by lightning. She knew me too well. I did feel like I'd been struck by lightning. Let me explain my decision, Harold continued reading, as I owe you all that much. What followed was the most brutal and beautiful character assassination I'd ever heard. She dissected each of my siblings with surgical precision, not cruelly, but with the clarity that comes from decades of observation. Victoria, living my dreams instead of her own. Marcus, following a script written by dead relatives. Patricia, sacrificing her own ambitions to keep everyone else happy. And then she got to me. And then there's Oliver, Harold read, and I braced myself for the inevitable disappointment, even from beyond the grave. But it didn't come. Instead, my grandmother's words painted a picture of someone I barely recognized, someone brave, someone authentic, someone worthy. She talked about my volunteer work at the homeless shelter, work I'd never mentioned to anyone in the family because I knew they'd find a way to diminish it. She talked about my art, not as a phase or a hobby, but as meaningful commentary on mental health and social isolation. She knew about the community space I'd created in my warehouse, how I let other struggling artists work there for almost nothing. She knew about the time I'd driven 4 hours to sit with Marcus when his marriage was in trouble, even though he'd spent the previous family dinner making jokes about my unemployability. She knew about the money I'd quietly given Patricia when her son broke his arm and she couldn't afford the medical bills. She saw me, really saw me. For the first time in my life, someone in my family had looked past the disappointment and the embarrassment and seen who I actually was. So, I'm leaving you my fortune, Oliver, Harold read, because I trust you to do something meaningful with it. Not because I don't love your siblings, I love all of you deeply, but because you've already shown me who you are when no one is watching, when there's no reward for goodness, when kindness costs you something. I was crying. Ugly, messy tears that I didn't bother to wipe away. The letter continued, addressing my siblings directly, encouraging them to examine what they truly wanted from their lives. And then came the part that made my heart stop. Don't let them make you feel guilty for this gift, Oliver. You didn't ask for it, you didn't manipulate for it, and you certainly didn't expect it. You earned it by being exactly who you are, kind, authentic, and brave enough to disappoint people in service of a greater truth. When Harold finished reading, the silence was deafening. Patricia was sobbing into David's shoulder. Marcus looked like he might be having the cardiac event he spent his days treating. And Victoria. Victoria looked like someone had just pulled the rug out from under her entire worldview. "This is emotional manipulation," she said finally, her voice carefully controlled but shaking with rage. Grandmother was obviously influenced by someone. "People don't just leave $23 million to—" She gestured at me dismissively. "To what?" I asked quietly, my voice steady for the first time since I'd walked into this room. "To someone who disappointed you? To someone who didn't become what you wanted them to become? To someone who has no idea how to manage that kind of responsibility," Victoria snapped. "You can barely manage your own life, Oliver. You live in a warehouse. You don't have health insurance. You've never held a stable job for more than 6 months." Her words hit like they always did, but this time something was different. This time, I had my grandmother's voice in my head, telling me I was worthy, telling me I was brave, telling me I was exactly who I was supposed to be. "You don't know anything about my life," I replied, still calm. "None of you do. You decided who I was years ago, and you never bothered to look any deeper." Marcus finally found his voice. "This will destroy the family. How are we supposed to come together for holidays, for family events, knowing that you have everything while we have nothing?" "You don't have nothing," I said. "You have exactly what you built for yourselves. Successful careers, beautiful families, homes, security. I have what grandmother left me, but you have what you earned." "What we earned," Patricia said through her tears. "Oliver, I've been working 60-hour weeks in an underfunded school while David's business struggled. We've been living paycheck to paycheck for 3 years, and now you're telling me that what I earned is enough." The pain in her voice cut through me like a knife. Patricia had always been kind to me, even when the others weren't. She didn't deserve to hurt like this. "Patricia, I didn't ask for this," I said, my own composure cracking. "I didn't want this. Do you think I wanted to walk in here and have my family hate me?" "Then give it back," Victoria said sharply. "If you really didn't want it, contest the will. Distribute it equally, like any rational person would." I stared at my hands for a long moment, feeling the weight of their expectations, their anger, their disappointment. The old Oliver would have agreed immediately, would have done anything to make them happy, to make them love me. But I wasn't the old Oliver anymore. "I can't do that," I said quietly. "Why not?" Marcus demanded. I looked up at them, these people I'd spent my whole life trying to please, trying to fit in with, trying to earn approval from, and for the first time, I told them the complete truth. Because it wasn't just about the money. It was about being seen. For the first time in my entire life, someone in this family saw me for who I really am, not who they wanted me to be. Grandmother didn't leave me this money because she thought I was perfect. She left it to me because she finally understood that I was never trying to disappoint you. I was just trying to be myself. I stood up, my hands shaking with emotion. "Do you know what it's like to love people who are embarrassed by your existence? To sit through family dinners where your own siblings make jokes about your failures? To watch your parents introduce you to their friends as our youngest, he's still figuring things out when you're 26 years old?" Victoria's expression softened slightly, but her voice remained cold. "So this is revenge? Taking our inheritance is how you get back at us for not supporting your artistic phase?" "Artistic phase?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Victoria, I've been creating art for 12 years. I've had pieces in galleries, I've won awards, I've built a community. This isn't a phase, this is my life. And the fact that you still call it a phase tells me everything I need to know about how you see me." I walked to the window and stared out at Boston, the city where I'd never quite fit in, the city where my family lived their successful, approved of lives while I struggled to find my place. I volunteer at a homeless shelter because I know what it feels like to be invisible, to have everyone around you wish you were someone else. I help other artists because I know what it's like to have your passion dismissed as worthless. I chose kindness because I know how much cruelty hurts. When I turned back to face them, my cheeks were wet with tears. Grandmother saw that. She saw that all the things you criticized me for, my sensitivity, my refusal to conform, my choice to prioritize relationships over career advancement, those weren't character flaws. They were my strengths. Patricia wiped her eyes and looked at me with something I'd never seen before. Understanding. I'm not angry that you inherited the money, she said slowly. I'm angry that I just realized I've been living the wrong life for 30 years. The weight of her words settled over the room like dust. What do you mean? David asked gently. Patricia laughed through her tears. I wanted to be a writer, David. I had stories in my head, characters I loved, worlds I wanted to create. But somewhere along the way, I convinced myself that wanting to write was selfish, that I needed to do something practical and helpful. So I became a teacher, which is wonderful, but it was never what I dreamed of. She looked at me with new eyes. You never stopped dreaming, did you? Even when we all told you to grow up, even when everyone said your art was worthless, you kept creating. I nodded, my throat tight. It was the only thing that made sense to me. Art was the only place I could be completely honest. Marcus had been quiet throughout this exchange, but now he cleared his throat. I need to tell you all something. I hate being a surgeon. The admission hung in the air like a confession of murder. Marcus, Sarah gasped. You've never said. I know, Marcus interrupted. I've never said it out loud because I was too ashamed. I became a surgeon because great-grandfather was a surgeon, because father wanted me to carry on the family tradition, because everyone expected it. But I hate it. I hate the pressure. I hate the hours. I hate having people's lives in my hands every day. He looked at me with something approaching envy. Do you know what I wanted to be when I was a kid? A teacher. I wanted to teach high school history. I loved stories about the past, about how people lived and what they believed in. But that wasn't prestigious enough for a Whitmore. Victoria stared at him like she'd never seen him before. Marcus, you're brilliant at what you do. Your colleagues respect you. You save lives. I save lives, yes, but I'm miserable doing it, Marcus said. I drink too much, I barely sleep, and Sarah and I fight constantly because I'm always stressed and angry. What kind of life is that? I sat back down, my anger replaced by profound sadness, not just for myself, but for all of us. This is what grandmother meant. We've all been living lives designed by other people. The difference is I stopped. Victoria was the last holdout, her jaw set stubbornly. This is all very touching, but it doesn't change the fact that the distribution of assets is completely unfair. I worked my entire life to be the kind of person who deserved. Deserved what? I interrupted, but gently. Deserved money? Deserved recognition? Victoria, you're a brilliant lawyer. You have a beautiful family, a successful practice, respect from your peers. What more do you need? I need to know that my efforts mattered, she said, and for the first time, her voice cracked. I need to know that all those years of perfect grades, of working 100-hour weeks to make partner, of being exactly what everyone wanted me to be, I need to know it was worth something. I leaned forward, feeling something I'd never felt toward Victoria before, genuine compassion. It was worth something. It was worth everything to the clients you helped, to the precedents you set, to the junior associates you mentored. But it was worth something to you only if you chose it, Victoria. Only if it was what you really wanted. I don't know what I really want, she whispered, and the admission seemed to surprise her as much as anyone else. Harold, who had been silent throughout our family reckoning, cleared his throat gently. There is one more thing. Oliver, your grandmother mentioned a safety deposit box. I nodded, wiping my eyes. She said there was something inside that I would understand. Harold pulled a small wrapped package from his briefcase. She asked me to retrieve the contents after her death. My hands were shaking as I unwrapped it. Inside was a small, leather-bound journal, worn from years of handling. On the cover, in grandmother's elegant handwriting, were the words "Dreams Deferred." I opened to the first page and read aloud. This journal contains all the dreams I gave up in order to become the woman everyone expected me to be. I was going to be an artist once. I painted watercolors of a harbor and dreamed of showing them in galleries. But that wasn't appropriate for a Whitmore woman in 1962. My voice broke as I continued reading about her abandoned dreams, travel, writing, teaching children. Dreams she'd sacrificed for approval, for the expectations of others. At the end, she'd written, I pray that my grandchildren will be braver than I was. I pray they will choose authenticity over approval, passion over prestige, and love over legacy. Most of all, I pray that if one of them has the courage to live differently, the others will see it as inspiration rather than betrayal. The room was completely silent except for the sound of people crying and the distant hum of Boston traffic. Patricia was the first to speak. I want to start writing again. Marcus nodded slowly. I want to look into teaching programs. Maybe it's not too late. All eyes turned to Victoria, who sat perfectly still, staring at her hands. When she finally looked up, her carefully constructed composure had completely crumbled. I don't know who I am, she said quietly. I've been Margaret Whitmore's granddaughter, Harvard Law's star student, Morrison and Associates' youngest partner, Dr. Chen's wife, Emma and Michael's mother, but I don't know who Victoria is when she's not performing one of those roles. I reached across the table and took my sister's hand, something I hadn't done since we were children. Maybe that's okay. Maybe not knowing who you are is the first step to figuring it out. Victoria squeezed my hand, and for the first time in years, she looked at me without disappointment or embarrassment. I owe you an apology. Actually, I owe you about 1,000 apologies. I've been cruel to you, Oliver. I've dismissed your choices, mocked your dreams, and made you feel like you didn't belong in your own family. We all did, Patricia added quietly. We treated you like you were broken because you wouldn't break the way we did. Marcus nodded. I used to tell people you were still figuring things out because I was embarrassed that you were happy while I was miserable. I couldn't understand how someone with so little could be more content than someone with so much. I was crying openly now. I just wanted you to love me. I didn't want to disappoint you, but I couldn't figure out how to be someone else. I tried, for years I tried, but it was killing me. We should have loved you for exactly who you were, Victoria said. We should have celebrated your courage instead of punishing it. Harold cleared his throat. Your grandmother left one final instruction. She wanted you to use part of the money to help your siblings pursue their deferred dreams. Not as charity, but as investment in the people they could become. I didn't hesitate. Of course, whatever they need. Oliver, we can't ask you to, Patricia began. You're not asking, I interrupted. I'm offering. Patricia, you want to write? Let's set up a trust fund so you can focus on your writing. Marcus, you want to teach? Let's make sure you can go back to school without worrying about money. I turned to Victoria. And Victoria, I don't know what you want to discover about yourself, but whatever it is, I want to help you find it. Victoria started laughing through her tears. This is insane. A year ago, I was planning to contest grandmother's will if she left you more than a token amount. Now you're offering to fund my existential crisis. Maybe that's exactly what families should do for each other, I said with a smile. Fund each other's existential crises. 6 months later, I was standing in Patricia's kitchen reading her first published short story in a literary magazine. Marcus had just started his master's program in education. Victoria was somewhere in Italy, sending us postcards of watercolor paintings she was creating. Apparently, she'd inherited grandmother's artistic eye along with her legal mind. And me? I was still creating art, but now I had the resources to establish a foundation supporting struggling artists and art therapy programs. The Whitmore Foundation's first initiative was a community center in my old neighborhood where people could come to create, to heal, and to discover who they were when no one was telling them who to be. On the first anniversary of grandmother's death, we met at her grave in Mount Auburn Cemetery. We brought flowers, but more importantly, we brought stories of risks taken, dreams pursued, and the courage to disappoint people in service of truth. Standing there among the old oak trees, I realized that grandmother had given me something far more valuable than money. She had given me my family back, not as we had been, bound together by obligation and expectation, but as we could be, united by understanding, acceptance, and love. Thank you, grandmother, I whispered, placing my hand on the marble headstone. Thank you for seeing us. And in the rustling of leaves and the gentle warmth of the afternoon sun, it almost seemed like Margaret Eleanor Whitmore was smiling.